The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of William's modest apartment in London. He sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The television hummed softly in the background, playing the morning news program he always watched before heading to his job at the local library. William adjusted his reading glasses and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 in the morning, and he needed to leave soon. At 35 years old, William had built a quiet life for himself. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom flat that overlooked a busy street. His days followed a comfortable routine. He would wake at 6, prepare breakfast, watch the news, and then catch the bus to work. His evenings were spent reading, occasionally meeting friends at the pub, or calling his sister Sarah, who lived in Manchester with her family. William's relationship with his father had always been complicated. Charles, his father, was a man of few words who worked long hours as a senior government advisor. Throughout William's childhood, Charles had been present but distant, always preoccupied with matters of state and important meetings. Their conversations rarely went beyond pleasantries and discussions about the weather or current events. Despite the emotional distance, William harbored no resentment. He understood that his father came from a different generation, one where men didn't freely express their emotions or engage in heart-to-heart conversations with their children. Charles had provided well for the family, ensuring William and Sarah received excellent educations and never wanted for anything material. The morning news droned on about economic policies and traffic updates. William was about to switch off the television when the program suddenly cut to breaking news. The familiar urgent music played, and the newsreader's expression turned grave. William paused, his hand frozen on the remote control. "We interrupt our regular programming with breaking news from Buckingham Palace," the newsreader announced. William's heart began to beat faster. Palace announcements were rare and usually significant. He set down the remote and leaned forward in his chair. The screen switched to a reporter standing outside the palace gates. Behind her, a small crowd had already begun to gather, despite the early hour and the persistent rain. William noticed the royal standard was flying at half-mast, and a cold feeling settled in his stomach. "The palace has just released an official statement," the reporter said, her voice solemn. She held an umbrella in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. "It is with deep regret that we announce the passing of Lord Charles Pemberton, senior advisor to the Crown and trusted confidant to the royal family for over 3 decades. The mug slipped from William's hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. Hot tea splashed across the tiles, but he didn't notice. The room seemed to tilt, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. This couldn't be real. He had spoken to his father just 3 days ago. Charles had sounded tired, but otherwise normal, complaining about the endless meetings and expressing his intention to take a holiday soon. The reporter continued speaking, but William could no longer process the words. His mind raced backward through time, searching for signs he might have missed. His father had mentioned feeling under the weather last week, but William had dismissed it as typical autumn flu. Charles never complained about his health and rarely took sick days. William's phone began to ring. He looked at the screen and saw his sister's name. With trembling hands, he answered the call. "William, have you seen the news?" Sarah's voice was thick with tears. "I can't believe it. How could he be gone?" "I just saw it," William managed to say. His own voice sounded strange to his ears, hollow and distant. "When did you last speak to him?" "Tuesday evening," Sarah replied. "He called to ask about the children. He sounded fine, William. How could this happen?" William didn't have an answer. The shock was beginning to give way to a crushing weight in his chest. All the conversations they never had, all the words left unspoken between father and son, now hung in the air like ghosts. He had always assumed there would be more time, that perhaps in retirement, his father would finally open up and they could forge the relationship William had always secretly yearned for. "We need to go to the palace," Sarah said. "Mother is already there. The Queen herself called her this morning." Their mother, Elizabeth, had divorced Charles 15 years ago, but they had remained cordial for the sake of their children and Charles's position. William wondered how she was handling the news. Despite their separation, he knew his parents had once loved each other deeply. William stood up carefully, avoiding the broken ceramic on the floor. His legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had become unreliable. He moved to his bedroom and began pulling clothes from his wardrobe. Black suit, white shirt, black tie, the uniform of mourning. As he dressed, memories flooded his mind. His father teaching him to play chess when he was 8, insisting that strategic thinking was essential for life. Charles attending his university graduation, standing proud but reserved in the crowd. The awkward lunches they shared once a month where they discussed politics and literature, but never feelings or fears. William realized with a sharp pang that he knew more about his father's opinions on foreign policy than he did about his dreams, regrets, or what made him truly happy. Charles had been a public figure, respected and admired, but to his son, he remained largely a mystery. The taxi ride to Buckingham Palace passed in a blur. London streets were slick with rain, and pedestrians hurried along under umbrellas. Life continued its normal pace for everyone else, while William's world had fundamentally shifted. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed his eyes. The palace gates were surrounded by reporters and members of the public paying their respects. Security recognized William and quickly ushered him through a side entrance. The corridors inside were hushed, staff members moving with quiet efficiency. William had visited the palace only a handful of times, always feeling out of place in its grandeur. His father, however, had walked these halls with confidence, belonging to this world in a way William never could. A palace aide, a young woman with a sympathetic expression, led him to a private sitting room. Sarah was already there, along with their mother. Elizabeth sat composed on a silk-covered chair, her hands folded in her lap. Only the redness around her eyes betrayed her grief. "William," she said, rising to embrace him. "I'm so sorry, darling." He held his mother tightly, feeling like a child again despite his 35 years. Sarah joined them, and for a moment, the three of them stood together, united in their loss. "What happened?" William finally asked when they separated. The news didn't say much. Elizabeth returned to her chair, smoothing her skirt with careful movements. "It was his heart," she said quietly. "He collapsed in his office late last night. They tried everything, but it was too sudden. The Queen was with him at the end. She held his hand." William felt his knees weaken. The image of his reserved, dignified father dying in his office, still working even in his final moments, was almost too much to bear. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He left letters. Elizabeth continued. "One for each of us. The Queen's private secretary will bring them shortly." Letters. William looked up, surprised. It seemed so unlike his father to leave personal messages. Charles had always struggled with emotional expression, preferring to show his care through actions rather than words. The thought that his father had taken the time to write to them, knowing perhaps that his time was limited, made the loss even more acute. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The Queen's private secretary entered, a distinguished man in his 60s carrying a leather portfolio. He expressed his condolences with practiced grace and handed each of them an envelope bearing Charles's distinctive handwriting. William stared at his name, written in his father's careful script. His hand shook as he held the envelope. Part of him wanted to tear it open immediately, desperate for these final words from his father. Another part feared what it might contain: regrets, disappointments, or worse, the same emotional distance that had characterized their relationship. "The Queen would like to see you when you're ready," the secretary said gently. "There's no rush. Take all the time you need." After he left, the room fell silent. Each of them held their letters, but no one moved to open them. It was as if doing so would make Charles's death final, irreversible. "He loved you both so much," Elizabeth said suddenly. "I know he didn't always show it the way you needed, but everything he did was for you children. Every late night, every sacrifice, it was all so you could have better lives." William nodded, unable to trust his voice. He knew his mother was right, but it didn't ease the ache of lost opportunities. He thought of all the times he had wanted to push past his father's reserve, to demand more than surface-level interactions, but had always retreated, respecting the boundaries Charles had established. Sarah was the first to open her letter. Tears streamed down her face as she read, occasionally letting out small gasps. Their mother followed suit, reading with a composed expression that occasionally cracked, revealing the depth of her emotion. William remained frozen, the envelope heavy in his hands. Around him, the palace continued its stately rhythm. Somewhere in these grand rooms, kings and queens had received news of wars and peace, of births and deaths. His father had been part of this world, had helped shape decisions that affected millions. But to William, he had simply been dad, distant, proper, unknowable dad. Finally, with trembling fingers, William broke the seal on the envelope. His father's handwriting covered 2 pages, more than Charles had ever written to him before. The first line made his breath catch. "My dear William, if you are reading this, then I have failed to say in life what I should have said 1,000 times." William's vision blurred with tears. He set the letter aside, unable to continue. The weight of his grief pressed down on him, and he did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He slid from the chair onto his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his loss and the cruel irony that his father had finally found the words to express his love, but only in death. The ornate carpet was soft beneath his knees as William knelt, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He felt his mother's hand on his shoulder and his sister's arms around him, but the pain remained acute. All those years of polite distance, of unspoken feelings, of missed connections, they stretched out before him like an insurmountable chasm. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a quiet room in Buckingham Palace, a son mourned not just the father he had lost, but the relationship they never had the chance to build. The rain against the windows provided a melancholy soundtrack to their grief, each drop a reminder of time's relentless passage and opportunities forever lost. The following days passed in a strange mixture of public ceremony and private grief. William found himself thrust into a world he had always observed from the periphery. As the son of Lord Charles Pemberton, he was expected to participate in the official mourning period, to shake hands with dignitaries, and to maintain the composed demeanor his father had perfected over decades of service. The state funeral was scheduled for the following week, an honor reserved for those who had given exceptional service to the crown. William learned that his father would be buried in a section of Westminster Abbey reserved for the nation's most distinguished servants. It was a recognition of Charles's dedication, but to William, it felt like another barrier between them. Even in death, his father belonged more to the state than to his family. 3 days after the announcement, William finally found the courage to read his father's letter in full. He sat in his childhood bedroom at his mother's house, surrounded by remnants of his youth, cricket trophies, university pennants, and photographs of family holidays. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the familiar space. His father's words were careful, measured, but beneath the formal language, William detected something he had rarely seen: vulnerability. "My dear William," the letter began again, "if you are reading this, then I have failed to say in life what I should have said 1,000 times. I have watched you grow from a curious boy into a thoughtful, kind man, and my pride in you has been boundless. Yet I know I have failed to express this in ways that matter. You must understand that I was raised in a different time, by parents who believed that emotional distance was a form of strength. My father, your grandfather, spoke to me primarily through criticism and expectation. When I became a father myself, I swore I would be different, but I found myself trapped by the patterns of my upbringing. I remember when you were 7, you came to my study with a drawing you had made of our family. You were so proud, so eager for my approval. I glanced at it briefly and told you it was nice before returning to my work. I saw your face fall, saw you quietly fold the drawing and leave. That night, I retrieved it from the wastebasket where you had thrown it and kept it in my desk drawer. I still have it. There were so many moments like that, William. Moments where I chose duty over connection, where I hid behind formality instead of showing you my heart. I told myself I was providing for you, giving you stability and opportunity, but I know now that what you needed was simply your father's love, freely given and openly expressed. I want you to know that every school play, every sports day, every achievement, I celebrated them all, even if only in the privacy of my own heart. I have a box in my office filled with newspaper clippings about you, programs from your university performances, even a menu from that little restaurant where we had lunch on your 30th birthday. You ordered the fish, and I had the lamb. You talked about your work at the library, your passion for preserving history, and I want to tell you how proud I was that you had found your calling. Instead, I commented on the weather. My greatest regret is not the long hours I worked or the dinners I missed. It is the emotional inheritance I passed on to you. This difficulty with expressing feelings, this tendency to maintain distance even with those we love most. I see it in you sometimes, the way you hold yourself back, and I'm deeply sorry for that gift I never meant to give. But I also see your mother in you, your warmth, your ability to connect with others, your gentle humor. These are the qualities that will serve you well in life, far better than my reserve ever served me. There is something else I must tell you. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctors were optimistic, said that with treatment and lifestyle changes, I had many years ahead. I began these letters then, thinking I had time to perhaps find the courage to say these words in person. It seems I was wrong about the time, but I am grateful for the chance to write them at least. I want you to live, William. Truly live. Take risks with your heart that I never could. Tell people you love them. Make mistakes. Be vulnerable. The armor I wore protected me from hurt, perhaps, but it also protected me from joy. Know that in my final months, I thought of you constantly. I would walk past the library sometimes, just to catch a glimpse of you through the windows, working at your desk. You looked content, focused, at peace with your place in the world. It gave me such comfort. I love you, my son. I have loved you from the moment you were born, when a nurse placed you in my arms, and you gripped my finger with such fierce determination. I loved you through every stage of your life, even when I couldn't show it. And wherever I am now, that love continues, finally, free from the constraints I placed upon it in life. Be happy, William. Be open. Be everything I couldn't be. With all my love, your father. William read the letter 3 times, tears streaming freely down his face. Each word was a revelation, pulling back the curtain on a man he thought he knew but had never truly understood. The image of his father, keeping his childhood drawing, collecting mementos of his life, walking past the library just to see him. It was almost too much to bear. He thought about his father's revelation about the heart condition. 6 months. Charles had known for 6 months that his time might be limited. And, still, he had maintained his usual routine, their monthly lunches passing without any hint of urgency or change. It was so typically his father, facing mortality with the same stoic composure he brought to everything else. Sarah found him there an hour later, still holding the letter. She sat beside him on the narrow bed, and, without words, he handed her the pages. As she read, fresh tears traced paths down her cheeks. "He mentions me in mine, too," she said quietly when she finished. "Says he used to watch my children playing in the park near his office. Never approached, just watched from a distance. Can you imagine? Grandfather watching his grandchildren play and not joining them." William could imagine it all too well. It was exactly what their father would do. Love from a distance, afraid or unable to bridge the gap his own upbringing had created. The day of the funeral arrived gray and solemn. Westminster Abbey was filled with dignitaries, government officials, and members of the royal family. The Queen herself sat in the front row, a gesture that spoke volumes about Charles's importance to the crown. William sat with his family, wearing the same black suit he had put on that first terrible morning, now feeling like a second skin. The service was beautiful and formal, exactly as Charles would have wanted. Hymns echoed through the ancient stone arches, and eulogies spoke of duty, service, and unwavering loyalty. The Prime Minister called Charles a guardian of tradition and a steady hand in turbulent times. The Queen's representative spoke of his discretion, wisdom, and absolute trustworthiness. But when it came time for family tributes, William surprised himself by standing. He hadn't planned to speak, hadn't prepared any words. Sarah looked at him with concern, but he gave her a reassuring nod and made his way to the pulpit. The abbey fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. Hundreds of faces looked up at him expectantly. For a moment, William felt the weight of expectation his father must have carried daily. The need to say the right thing, to maintain proper form, to represent something larger than himself. Then he thought of his father's letter, of the drawings saved from the wastebasket, of an emotionally constrained man desperate to connect with his children, but not knowing how. And William decided to do what Charles never could, speak from the heart. "My father," he began, his voice carrying through the vast space, "was a man of few words but deep feelings. Many of you knew him as Lord Pemberton, advisor and confidant, a man of unwavering duty and discretion. But I knew him simply as Dad, and that relationship was complicated." A murmur rippled through the congregation. This was not the type of eulogy typically delivered at such formal occasions. William saw his mother's encouraging nod and continued. "My father struggled to express emotion. He showed love through provision, through sacrifice, through working endless hours to ensure his family had every opportunity. But he found it almost impossible to say the words, 'I love you.' I used to think this was because he didn't feel things deeply. I was wrong." William pulled his father's letter from his pocket, holding it up. "My father left letters for his family. In them, he revealed a man we barely knew, one who saved childhood drawings, who collected newspaper clippings of our achievements, who walked past my workplace just to catch a glimpse of me. He was a man who felt everything, but could express almost nothing, trapped by the emotional constraints of his generation and upbringing." The abbey was utterly still now, even the Queen leaning forward slightly in her seat. "In his letter to me, my father expressed regret for this emotional distance. He urged me to live differently, to take risks with my heart, to tell people I love them. And so, in honor of my father and the man he wanted to be, I'm going to start now." William looked directly at his mother and sister. "Mom, Sarah, I love you both deeply. Thank you for being the warmth in our family when Dad couldn't be." He scanned the congregation, recognizing faces from his father's world. "To those who worked with my father, who saw him every day, who knew his dedication and brilliance, thank you for being his extended family, for providing him with purpose and connection." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "My father's life was one of service, yes, but also of silent love, of unexpressed pride, of dreams deferred for duty. He was a man caught between worlds, the formal, traditional world he served so well, and the emotional, connected world he glimpsed but could never quite enter." William paused, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition in the ancient abbey, understanding for the first time the world his father had inhabited. But in his final act, through these letters, my father did what he couldn't do in life. He opened his heart. He showed us that beneath the reserve, beyond the formality, beat the heart of a man who loved deeply and completely. So today, as we lay Lord Charles Pemberton to rest, I choose to remember not just the public servant, but the private man. The father who saved drawings, who memorized lunch orders, who walked past libraries and watched children play in parks, always loving from a distance, but loving nonetheless. William's voice broke slightly on the final words. "Dad, I heard you. Your words reached me. And I promise to live as you asked, openly, vulnerably, with my heart on my sleeve rather than locked away. This is how I will honor you, by being the man you wanted to be but couldn't quite manage. I love you, Dad. I always have, and I always will." As William returned to his seat, the abbey remained silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, applause began, first from Sarah, then their mother, then spreading through the congregation in a breach of protocol that somehow felt entirely appropriate. Even the Queen nodded approvingly. understanding that sometimes love requires breaking with tradition. The rest of the service proceeded as planned, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. The formal goodbye had become personal. The state funeral had become a family's farewell. As they followed the coffin out of the abbey, William felt a strange lightness despite his grief. He had done what his father couldn't, expressed love publicly, vulnerably, without reservation. Outside, the London sky had cleared, and weak autumn sunlight filtered through the clouds. As the funeral procession made its way through the streets, ordinary people stood respectfully, some throwing flowers, others simply bearing witness. William realized that his father had touched many lives in ways both seen and unseen through grand gestures of service and small acts of hidden kindness. At the private burial that followed, attended only by family and closest friends, William watched as his father's coffin was lowered into the ground. The Queen herself placed a white rose on the casket, followed by Elizabeth, Sarah, and finally William. As he knelt to place his flower, William whispered the words he had never been able to say in life. "I understand now, Dad. And it's okay. It was always okay." The reception afterward was held at the family home, a modest gathering compared to the grandeur of the Abbey service. People shared stories of Charles. Some William had heard before, many he hadn't. He learned that his father had quietly paid for the education of his secretary's children, that he had visited sick colleagues in the hospital, always arriving after official visiting hours to avoid recognition. Each story revealed another facet of a man who had lived a full life just slightly out of view. As evening fell and guests began to leave, William found himself in his father's study. Little had been changed since Charles's death. Papers still lay neatly stacked on the desk, reading glasses folded precisely on top. The room smelled of leather and old books, with a faint hint of the pipe tobacco Charles had given up years ago, but occasionally still craved. In the desk drawer, exactly where the letter had said it would be, William found his childhood drawing. The paper was yellowed with age, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. The crude crayon figures, a tall man in a suit, a woman in a dress, two small children, and a lopsided house, were barely recognizable as a family. But in the corner, in Charles's neat handwriting, was a date and a note. William's family portrait. Age 7. Precious. That single word, precious, undid William completely. He sank into his father's chair, holding the drawing, and wept for all the words unspoken, all the embraces withheld, all the love that had existed but remained unexpressed until it was too late. In the weeks following the funeral, William found himself changed. The rawness of his grief gradually gave way to something else, a determination to live differently, to honor his father's final wish by embracing the emotional openness Charles had struggled with his entire life. He returned to work at the library, but his interactions with colleagues and patrons took on a new quality. Where before he might have hidden behind professional distance, William now made an effort to truly connect. He learned about his co-workers' families, their dreams, and struggles. He recommended books, not just based on literary merit, but on what he sensed people needed emotionally. The library, already a warm place, became warmer still. One evening, while organizing a new shipment of biographies, William came across a book about the royal household during his father's era of service. Curious, he flipped through the pages and was startled to find a photograph of his father standing beside the Queen at some state function. Charles looked exactly as William remembered him, composed, professional, giving nothing away. But now, William could see past the facade to the man who had saved childhood drawings and memorized lunch orders. His mother called that night, as she had taken to doing regularly since the funeral. Their conversations had evolved from the stilted check-ins of before to something richer and more honest. "I've been thinking about your eulogy," Elizabeth said. "Your father would have been mortified by the applause, you know, breaking protocol in Westminster Abbey of all places." William smiled, picturing his father's likely reaction. "I know, but I think he also would have understood why I did it." "He would have," Elizabeth agreed. "Did I ever tell you that he called me the night before he died?" William's breath caught. This was new information. No, we didn't mention it. It was late, past midnight. He said he couldn't sleep, which was unusual. Your father could always sleep, no matter what was happening. He talked for almost an hour, which was probably more than he'd spoken to me in the past year combined. Elizabeth's voice grew soft with memory. He told me about watching you at the library, about Sarah's children in the park. He said he was proud of how we'd raised you both, despite everything. And then, just before he hung up, he said he was sorry. Sorry for what? William asked, though he suspected he knew. For not being the husband or father he wanted to be. For choosing duty over family so many times. For the divorce, though we both knew that was mutual. I think he knew somehow that his time was running short. That call was his way of making peace. William felt tears prick his eyes again. It seemed he cried easily now, as if his father's death had broken down his own emotional barriers. What did you say to him? I told him the truth, that we had done our best with the tools we had, that you and Sarah were wonderful people despite our imperfections as parents, and that I forgave him, though I'm not sure he ever forgave himself. They talked for another hour, sharing memories and insights. William learned things about his parents' marriage he had never known, how they had met at a university debate, with Charles arguing for tradition and Elizabeth for progress, how they had loved each other fiercely in the beginning, before the demands of Charles's career created an unbridgeable gulf between them. After the call, William sat at his kitchen table, the same place where he had learned of his father's death weeks earlier. The shattered mug had long been cleaned up, but he could still see the ghost of that morning. The shock, the disbelief, the beginning of understanding that things would never be the same. He pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter to anyone in particular, just thoughts and memories that seemed important to preserve. He wrote about the chess lessons, the awkward lunches, the graduation ceremony where Charles had stood apart from the other parents, proud but alone. He wrote about the letter, the funeral, the drawing in the desk drawer. He wrote until his hand cramped and the pages were full. Over the following months, William made good on his promise to live more openly. He reached out to old friends he had let drift away, rebuilding connections that his inherited reserve had allowed to wither. He started dating again, allowing himself to be vulnerable with potential partners in ways that had always felt too risky before. At work, he initiated a memoir writing program for elderly patrons, encouraging them to record their stories before it was too late. The program was inspired by his father's letters, the idea that everyone had important words inside them that needed to be expressed while there was still time. It became wildly popular, with William helping participants shape their memories into narratives their families would treasure. Sarah noticed the changes in him during their now regular Sunday dinners. "You're different," she observed one evening as her children played in the garden. "More present, I suppose." "It's what Dad asked for," William replied, watching his nephew attempt to climb a tree. In his letter, he told me to truly live. "I'm trying. I've been thinking about that too," Sarah said, "about emotional inheritance. I see Dad's reserve in myself, sometimes, especially with the children. I catch myself pulling back when they need comfort, defaulting to practical solutions instead of emotional support. It's like a family curse we need to break." William reached over and squeezed his sister's hand. "Then we break it together. One hug, one I love you, one vulnerable moment at a time." 6 months after the funeral, the Queen's office contacted William with an unexpected request. Her Majesty wished to meet with Charles's family privately. The meeting was arranged for the following week, in a small sitting room at Buckingham Palace rather than a formal audience chamber. The Queen, in her 80s but still sharp and commanding, greeted them warmly. She spoke of Charles with genuine affection, sharing anecdotes about his service that revealed yet another side of William's father. "Your father," she said, "was one of the few people who would disagree with me when necessary. He did it respectfully, of course, but he never let protocol override his principles. That's rarer than you might think in these circles." She presented them with a private memoir she had commissioned about Charles's service, filled with photographs and documents William had never seen. But the real surprise came at the end of the meeting. "Your father established something before his death," the Queen explained. A foundation for the children of public servants, to ensure they don't lose connection with their parents due to the demands of service. He funded it quietly, naming it after his own father. He said he wanted to break a cycle. William felt his throat tighten. Even facing his own mortality, Charles had been thinking of other families, other children who might grow up feeling the distance he had inadvertently created with his own. As they left the palace, William felt a sense of completion. His father's story, which had seemed to end with such finality that morning in Westminster Abbey, continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Charles's legacy wasn't just in the policies he had shaped or the crises he had helped navigate. It was in the lives he had touched, the patterns he had tried to break, the love he had struggled to express, but never stopped feeling. A year after his father's death, William stood in the library hosting a special event. The memoir program had grown beyond his wildest expectations, and tonight they were launching a published collection of participant stories. The room was full of families spanning generations, all there to celebrate the power of putting feelings into words. As William prepared to speak, he fingered the note in his pocket. Not his father's letter this time, but one he had written himself. It was addressed to the child he hoped to have someday, filled with all the things he wanted them to know about love, vulnerability, and the importance of emotional expression. He wouldn't wait until it was too late. When the time came, he would read it aloud, would say the words directly, would ensure no distance grew where closeness should flourish. "Thank you all for coming," William began, looking out at the assembled crowd. "This program was inspired by my father, who taught me, at the very end of his life, that it's never too late to say what needs to be said, but it's better not to wait." He spoke about the importance of breaking cycles, of choosing vulnerability over safety, of the terrible cost of emotional distance. He saw heads nodding throughout the room. So many people carrying similar struggles, similar regrets, similar hopes for doing better. After the event, as William helped clean up, Mrs. Patterson, one of the memoir participants, approached him. She was in her 80s, sharp-eyed, and direct. "I knew your father," she said unexpectedly. "Years ago, he helped my son get into a good school when we couldn't afford it. Never made a fuss about it, never wanted thanks. Just quietly made it happen." William smiled, no longer surprised by these revelations. "That sounds like him. I wrote about it in my memoir," she continued, "about how one act of hidden kindness can ripple through generations. My son became a teacher because of the education your father made possible. He's touched thousands of lives, all because a reserved man in a suit decided to help without seeking credit." As Mrs. Patterson walked away, William stood alone in the library, surrounded by stories of lives lived and love expressed. He thought of his father, probably watching for whatever came after, hopefully seeing that his final message had been received and acted upon. The autumn rain had started again, drumming against the library windows just as it had that morning a year ago. But this time the sound didn't bring pain. Instead, it reminded William of continuity, of cycles, of the way water nourishes new growth even as it washes away what came before. He gathered his things, preparing to head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to live openly and love freely. He would make mistakes, certainly. There would be moments when the old patterns reasserted themselves, when safety seemed preferable to vulnerability. But he would persist, honoring his father's memory not through emotional distance, but through its opposite. As William locked the library doors and stepped into the rainy night, he thought he understood something fundamental about inheritance. We receive from our parents not just genes and mannerisms, but patterns of being. Some of these patterns serve us well, others constrain us. The greatest gift we can give to those who come after is the courage to break the harmful patterns, to transform the inheritance before passing it on. Charles had started that transformation in his letters, in his foundation, in his final attempts at connection. William would continue it in his daily choices, his open heart, his willingness to speak love aloud. And someday his own children would inherit not emotional distance, but emotional fluency, not just duty, but joy. The rain soaked through William's jacket as he walked to the bus stop, but he didn't hurry. Sometimes, he had learned, it was important to feel things fully, even discomfort, even grief, even the cold October rain. His father had taught him that in the end, not through words spoken in life, but through words written in the shadow of death, and through the spaces between words where love had always lived, waiting to be discovered. William smiled, thinking of the drawings still kept safe in his desk at home, now joined by his father's letter and the growing collection of memories shared by others. Each piece of paper was a bridge across the gulf that Charles had struggled to cross in life. Together, they formed a complete picture, not of a perfect man or a perfect relationship, but of something real and complex and ultimately defined by love. The bus arrived, bright and warm against the dark night. William climbed aboard, nodding to the driver, taking his usual seat by the window. As the city lights blurred past, he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Sarah, "Thinking of you. Love you. Dinner Sunday." Her response came quickly. "Love you too. Wouldn't miss it." Simple words, easily said now. But William knew their power, understood their importance. His father had taught him that in the most profound and painful way possible. And for that hard lesson, for the man who had loved imperfectly but completely, William would always be grateful. The bus carried him home through the rainy streets of London, past the palace where his father had spent so many years, past the library where William was building a different kind of legacy, toward a future where love didn't have to hide behind duty, where words didn't have to wait until it was too late. In the end, that was Charles's greatest gift to his son, not the prestigious name or the powerful connections, but the hard-won understanding that life was too short and too precious to leave important things unsaid. William carried that knowledge with him now, an inheritance more valuable than any title or treasure. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, preparing it for whatever tomorrow might bring. And William, son of Charles, keeper of stories, breaker of patterns, rode through the night toward home, his heart finally as open as his father had wished it to be.